The Sword Saint Akemura Soga, a prodigy among Kagurabachi swordsmen and the wielder of the Magatsumi, the most destructive enchanted blade in all of existence. Transporting this smoke demon from one sorcery world to the other, how powerful would Akemura Soga be in the universe of Jujutsu Kaisen? In this video, we plan to answer just that question. And for this one, I've got my man Alonz.
Yo, what's good? I'm here to yap a bit about JJK and Kagurabachi, the two best shonen ever in the history of shonen.
So many people were asking, how does this guy do against JJK? How does this guy do against Sukuna? So I figured it would be great to have you on and we could just represent both sides of the equation and really get into how good Akamura would do in this verse. Because I definitely think, based off of what we saw, which we'll get into, he is a very serious threat, even if you switch him and isekai Akamura into the Jujutsu Kaisen sorcery world. Like, if we were to compare him to threats like the disaster curses, even like high-level culling game players like Oro or Ishigori, like, to say that Akamura basically probably surpasses all of those enemies just based off of that one malediction feat of genociding an entire island. Like, I don't know how you feel, because obviously the main malediction on the island isn't everything that he's capable of in combat. We've seen so much more to basically reinforce why he actually is as strong as we think he is. But like, even if you're looking at Akamura based off like what the disaster curses can do, like Jogo's meteor basically destroys in a humongous section of Shibuya. Dagon is encompassing that entire huge mall, with all of his water. Hanami can basically destroy almost all of Jujutsu headquarters with her branches. Like, on that scale, like, how do you see Akamura, like, compared to like the villain, the threats that the Jujutsu sorcerers are used to fighting?
I mean, that's a great question, and I feel like the best example I can give on where I stand there is like the Jogo Max Meteor is a maximum technique, right? That was Jogo's pinnacle outside of domain expansion. It doesn't get much better than that for him, I'm not gonna lie. And I feel like that is like, it seems like it's on a similar level to a casual B that is casted by Akamura Soga during the end of part 1 there. So I think he's bare minimum on that kind of destructive level, but I do not think it is crazy by any means to say that he can surpass it, if he really locks in. Obviously, we haven't seen his entire kit. Okay, granted, it's pretty difficult too when it's described to be infinite, questionably, in terms of how many abilities he can potentially manifest, but from the destruction we've seen, he is at least on that very minimum on that disaster curse level. But I would please say that he is above it, especially because of some of the unreal hacks advantage that Akamura Soga also has that the disaster curses bar Mahito maybe don't. But I assume, we'll kind of get into that more hacks, maybe some Mahito conversation kind of a bit later on. But in terms of just the raw scaling, I think he's easily like surpassing that top disaster curse level in Jujutsu Kaisen.
For sure. I definitely think there's a whole nother discussion to be had that, like you said, we'll definitely get in later when it comes to, Jogo, Dagon, and Mahito's, all their domains. But like, as far as it goes in just basic combat skills, I don't think it's out of the question to say, he surpasses these guys. I mean, again, like, you brought up Maximum Meteor, and something that I think is also really cool is we have something from 15 Finger Sukuna where we know his maximum range is 200 meters, but I think he reduces it to 140 in Shibuya just to keep Megami safe. And what seems to be a very similar amount of range is what Akamura dictates is going to be the battlefield for both Samura and Chihiro when he just reincarnates and starts that battle with them. And from the feats that he does in that short fight, using an attack like Butterfly that just effortlessly cleaves through like a large portion of the city that they're fighting in, assumedly in that range that he dictates. And then we also see him use things like B that tunnel a humongous crater into the ground, and that just goes not just through the ground but carves so deep it punctures through the Kamunabi secret base that's heavily reinforced. Like, it's absolutely nothing. So attacks like Maximum Meteor, things like Mahito covering most of the major Shibuya city blocks in that last final battle area with his like flesh summoning, all of that stuff, that's all just a basic flick of the wrist for Akamura. And based off of like, even in the culling game, Oro, Takako, Ishigori Ryu with like his Granite Blast going through and doing like a similar amount, if not more damage, like, it's safe to say that Akamura just on his basic combat skills is comparable to, if not surpassing, some of the biggest threats in the series.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think you made an interesting point there, but something I wanted to point out that's interesting about Akamura is the 250 meter range that Akamura Soga dictates in that Kagurabachi fight was because that is the area that was clear of civilians, which is basically him saying that he is limiting himself to a 250 meter range, but not necessarily that he couldn't surpass it if he wanted to, which only kind of makes him seem more impressive, because we know for sure that he was limiting his destructive capability and the damage that he was dealing to within that range, whereas, you know, it kind of is implied, especially through his feats on the island, that it surpasses that level. So even just from what we've seen of him, that already strongly implies that he has been massively holding back his destructive capability as to not exceed that safety boundary that Shiba managed to create for them by getting all the civilians out of there. So yeah, I think that's like a very good conclusion, is that he is like probably, you know, surpassing, but at the very least on the level of the top tiers in Jujutsu Kaisen.
Yeah, and that's not even just when it comes to, say, destructive capacity. On durability scaling, he's basically on the same thing when it comes to like his physical endurance. I mean, Samura Seiichi, another one of the most powerful characters in Kagurabachi, who was basically, you know, both his past feats in the Seitei War, which he was said to like look almost like a phoenix that would light up the entire battlefield in flames, to his current feats that we've seen in like the Kyoto arc and even fighting Akamura himself. All of this man's life force, you know, to say, you know, Samura is comparable to the disaster curses, I don't think is a stretch either, but the fact that all of this man's life force, sacrificing everything he had and attacking with everything that Samura could muster in that moment, was barely enough to just like only wound Akamura. It's safe to say that like even if Akamura was fighting disaster curses or these high level opponents from Shibuya, even from the Culling Game arc, like even if they brought out their most ultimate techniques, it's really struggling to say how much damage that would really do to Akamura, if at all, if he's surviving attacks that again are using all of Samura Seiichi's life force, who by all means, based off of that small little discussion we had, should be comparable to characters like the disaster curse as well. That's also to not even mention that Akamura is going to be working with probably a major speed advantage based off of Kagurabachi already surpassing lightning time around like its very early on chapters. And not to get too crazy with it, but this is also an Akamura that's moving faster than EI White Purity style. So like most characters, if they're not the upper echelon of Jujutsu Kaisen, aren't even going to be able to really react or compete with Akamura, let alone muster up enough strength to harm or even compare to the damage he's dealing.
Yeah, I think that's a very solid point about the speed as well, just because we don't know what the cap is in Kagurabachi, but we do know from, thanks to Sojo, very early on that the high tiers of the verse exceeded lightning speed. You know, pretty early on, EI White Purity is definitely up there, because that is the whole, you know, kind of crux of EI White Purity style. It's about speed. So the fact that, you know, the pinnacle of EI White Purity, Seiichi Samura, is being matched or even potentially surpassed by Akamura does kind of imply that, you know, going into that massively above lightning kind of territory isn't crazy to say for him. So yeah, just in terms of all-round stats, he's like at the very least on top tier JJK level, but surpassing in a lot of fields as well, which is obviously going to be crucial for the actual matchups.
Oh yeah, because it gets even like, it gets extremely controversial in general when you even talk about lightning speed for Jujutsu Kaisen characters as a whole. Like, let alone no matter how highball you want to say, even if you want to give, you know, Sukuna, Kashimo, Yuji, you know, Hakari, all these high tier characters lightning time, this is again, you know, a villain in a series that is matching the highest tier of that speed that is already, you know, without a doubt reaching lightning speed, as we said early on. So I think when it comes to most of his stats, Akamura is going to be one of the largest threats that a lot of these sorcerers have seen. Regardless of whether they're grade 1, special grade, Akamura is going to present a threat to almost basically everyone in the series. And we haven't even touched base on, in regards to everything that he's capable of as far as attack abilities, and let alone, like you said, Alon's too, we don't even know his full range of techniques that he can do. It's said to be almost infinite. Like even what we've already seen him do, which we've touched, you know, just scratched the surface of, is still only surface level what he's capable of doing. And I think the last thing that I want to touch base on before we even get into like some of the most interesting ways that I think Akamura would interact with the power system in some of his most interesting matchups just in general would be the biggest elephant in the room, which is he can do all of these destructive feats, he can do all of these speed feats, but how long can he even survive if he's fighting a gauntlet of all of the sorcerers like someone like Ryomen Sukuna did in Shinjuku? Which is to say, especially his blade Magatsumi specifically uses his life force as energy. But I mean, I don't know if you want to explain it, but like I don't think when it comes to endurance or stamina, like I think Akamura might be able to outlast most people in Jujutsu Kaisen as well.
I mean, yeah, just the very fact that his kind of like main sort of passive ability from just being there is that within a range around Akamura, he is basically constantly life draining his opponents and taking taking their life force as power for himself, which then helps him regenerate any injuries that he comes by to a level comparable to Seiichi Samura, is already, that's enough of a hack to like make him a questionable opponent in a lot of these matchups. And he has a lot of experience with jumping, you know, well, not jumping, but being jumped by the strongest of the verse, because we know that the 5 enchanted blade wielders before him all tried to take him down at the same time, and he had to surrender to even give them a chance. Like, it is outright stated that he was like by no means losing that fight. The history books kind of say otherwise, but we know that he was not losing that. He was doing really well and basically winning against all 5. It's just that he chose to step down after achieving his goal of the malediction. So having that in itself, just having this life training aura that helps you passively regen and train your opponent, is already kind of making him the perfect kind of you know, jumping target. So he's probably going to do even better than Sukuna could in a jumping, or a lot of JJK characters, because his kit is like perfectly built to deal with multiple strong opponents.
Literally, I guess like the best way to explain it, if we were to move it over to the JJK verse, would be because it's specifically like, we've even seen it when Yora was using the Magatsumi, right, too, that it's almost like you can imbue the life force that you steal and the life force that you're using to increase your own physical stats. We see Yora increase his own like punches and kicks and the way he's able to move by using that Magatsumi life drain ability to benefit him in certain ways. So like, it's almost as if like we get it described in Kagurabachi as the ultimate arcane, to sacrifice your life energy to turn it into this black energy, this jet black flame, this jet black, you know, in terms of the Magatsumi, everything that it uses is jet black because of this, you know, life force that it uses. It's almost like he's just manipulating Black Flash itself in some way, to use it like a JJK. I don't know if that's crazy to say, but like, it like, if we were to, you know, move that over. But obviously Akamura is strong. I think anyone who has made it this far into the video should be able to understand that based off of what we discussed. But I think what makes Jujutsu Kaisen always an interesting series is the fact that it's not just brute force. While, you know, being very powerful is definitely going to get you far, like characters like Gojo and Sukuna are proof of that, there are also very interesting ways that different curse techniques and different abilities can interact with Akamura that may make things questionable. Like, for example, I know you were really excited to talk about how like certain domains like Higuruma's or like maybe Hikari's or others might interact with Akamura specifically.
I don't know, if you want to like get into the interactions, I feel like Kagurabachi and JJK are just perfect for each other, because they both kind of show a similar level in terms of a lot of the, you know, destructive capability. But when it comes to hacks, like JJK and Kagurabachi, at least at like the top tiers, really do just show some abilities where your stats sometimes just don't matter, right? Like Mahito is a good example of that. Higuruma is a great example of that. Yutakabe is a great example of that, which I'm sure we can talk about. Maharaga has already been a conversation people have brought up as a potential opponent for Akamura Soga, and whether he could defeat him. So there are lots of like hacks abilities in both series, a lot of which Akamura Soga himself possesses, that kind of have some very interesting interactions, which I'm very excited to get into, especially that Higuruma one. I would love to get yapping about that, because I feel like that's one where I'm thinking, regardless of how strong Akamura is, he's going to find himself in trouble if he ends up facing Judgment and Higuruma, because of, you know, that thing that we don't talk about that Akamura did on the island. I feel like there's no way he's getting away with that. So I do feel like confiscation death penalty is coming his way, and as we know, because of, you know, Higuruma's weird rule, it will basically confiscate his entire enchanted blade the same way it does with Sukuna's cursed tool Kamatoke, which then leaves you with like the question of, can Akamura Soga actually, you know, do all that without his enchanted blade if he ended up in that situation? And I feel like that's kind of the interesting thing there, is we don't really know what he's capable of doing on his own. We haven't really seen what sort of sorcerer he's like without his blade. So in that kind of situation, it's a bit more of a toss-up, right? We don't have the evidence to necessarily push it either way. I think through the implication, I'd say, you know, Soga would probably still beat Higuruma's ass, but one cut from that executioner's blade and it is going to be over, you know? So it's definitely an interesting one, and by no means a sweep in terms of the Akamura side of the thing. And I feel like when we get on to talking about sorcerers or cursed spirits such as, you know, Mahito, Takabe, and potentially even people like, I don't know, Angel or Yuta Okosu, like there are some really neat interactions with certain techniques there that are going to be pretty fun to talk about, compared to the disaster curses, which are mostly just strong attack that we've already, you know, concluded Akamura surpasses.
Oh yeah. Like, for example, like the court trial in Higuruma, Akamura is not going to stand a chance against Judgment, even if for somehow, some way, that 200,000 person island genocide it does not come up, because I'm sure just based off of the flashback we see with Samura, knowing that Akamura was like a peacekeeper mercenary almost, where his job was to just slay evildoers when there was no like official like force to do so. Like, we already know he's probably done some questionable shit. I doubt the 200,000 person, you know, killing was my man's first offense in life. You know, I feel like there's levels to this shit, right? Like, you gotta do some previous steps before you take this plunge. So I think when it comes to domains like that are going to specifically rely on Akamura's personality, that is going to rip away especially the Magatsumi from him. But I kind of do agree with you based off of everything that we've seen and all of the implications. Akamura just being noted as like a prodigy of a swordsman even with before he received the Magatsumi. I have to imagine even if he gets barehanded, he could probably, you know, like you said, whoop Higuruma pretty fucking easily. But especially with like the speed advantage he's gonna have, like Higuruma being low combat experience. Yeah, it's only one touch for the Executioner's Blade, so that's definitely, you know, it does mean it's not a non-zero chance Higuruma can win, right? Now, when you compare it to like, you know, someone's domain like Hikari, where let's say, for example, I mean, obviously, if it comes down to it, Hikari's probably gonna die before he hits jackpot, right? But like, if Hikari was to jump in jackpot and Hikari is essentially immortal, like in that instance, you know, are we gonna say that Hikari is able to survive all of Akamura's slashes and cuts? Or, you know, maybe let's say that because Magatsumi is just literally life drain, that's a way that Kagurabachi's power system, or I guess in this case Akamura's just general, you know, ability kind of, you know, counters Hikari, right? Like if it's just life drain, maybe Hikari just gets cooked even if he's quote unquote immortal for that time, because it's just getting drained completely, it can't keep up, and then Hikari's, you know, unlimited curse energy is just not able to produce unlimited cursed energy. I think it's interesting the way that, like you said, the two systems in general can interact with one another, because it really does come down to chess. But I think in a sense of like Akamura's overwhelming stats, like unless you're dealing with like, as you mentioned, like an idle transfiguration, or like maybe a domain expansion from Naoya, where, you know, Time Cell Moon Palace, the moment that Akamura moves, his body is going to start crumbling apart. You know, no matter how fast he is, he's not going to be able to, you know, avoid that ability. Or like Yorozu with triple sickness or threefold affliction, where it's just, you know, true sphere, I don't even give a fuck about you, you're not, you know, the love of my life, Sukuna, I'm just gonna instantly activate my domain and you're just cooked. Like, you know, obviously you could say some battles may not go that way. Yorozu might not instantly domain the moment she sees Akamura, just like Naoya might not, so there's that. But I think it's more interesting to like just judge how we think like the Sword Saint would even be able to deal with powers that technically kind of just counter him outright, don't even give him a chance to move.
Yeah, I mean, I think Hikari is like a weird example, because obviously if you go into the domain and Hikari needs to roll for jackpot, there's a good chance Akamura just kills him before he gets one. But if Hikari gets a jackpot, which it's Hikari, I wouldn't put it past him, then you get this weird interaction where it's like, okay, Hikari can infinitely heal and have unlimited cursed energy, but then Soga is going to be constantly siphoning off Hikari's life. So we end up in a weird situation where Hikari is now basically just perpetually fueling Akamura's power, which really doesn't work in his favor here at all. So yeah, even though Hikari would probably, you know, survive, it's not really going to do him any favors, because at some point the jackpot will end and Akamura can kill him, you know? But then you do get to the domain expansions that are, you know, if they hit you, the fight is over. If Yorozu's True Sphere hits you, it's done. Like, Akamura would just be erased completely. If Infinite Void hit Akamura, that's it. There's nothing he can do. Naoya is a bit of a weird one, because it's strange to see how the vitality stealing ability, the healing that Akamura can get from that passive life drain, whether that would like repair the damage. That's kind of a strange one, because I don't know if it's damage or like a rule, you know? It's a
also, who's to even say this man has to move? He could just like activate it probably exactly. While standing still.
Like, there's lots of potential domains in JJK. Idle Transfiguration is another good example where, you know, if he does get caught in this domain expansion and he hasn't ended the fight before that point, he is going to lose, because that's what JJK excels at, right? Is that unless you have a very specific, very niche to the power system counter to a domain expansion, which Kagurabachi doesn't have, you are going to lose to a lot of these domain expansions, especially like, you know, the Yorozu, the Mahito, the Gojo domains. Those things are very, very problematic. So yeah, if he gets caught by those, I don't have much of an argument by means of Akamura winning. I do feel like there are, you know, on the other side of the scale, domains he would be able to deal with. So if you have a less insta-win sure hit, so for example, I don't know, maybe Jogo's domain, or a domain like Kenjaku's or Yuta's, where the sure hit is normally manually activated, and it's not necessarily a one-shot kill if you're on that high of a level. Even Sukuna's is a good example. Like, that ability to just consistently heal all of the damage by draining your opponent's life not only weakens them maybe to the point where a domain expansion isn't actually, you know, they're not able to hold it up anymore, but it also could sustain his life in a kind of similar way to how Gojo was healing through Sukuna's slashes simultaneously to stay alive. I feel like it's that kind of thing where there are so many interactions that Akamura does have the blatant advantage in, but there are also loads where he is just going to get one shot by something like True Spear.
Yeah, I think you brought up like a really good point, specifically those like one-shot abilities like Mahito, or like even to take it out of domains for a second, you have things like Maki's Soul Split Katana or Yuji's Soul Strikes, where it comes into question, how does Jujutsu Kaisen's representation of the soul interact with Akamura Soga, and let alone how does that also play with the fact that, you know, Akamura Soga's Magatsumi deals with this life-draining, you know, passive energy. Like, are we, like, I could see someone make an argument where, oh, because it's life drain, because it's all of this, you could say maybe Akamura would be aware of the soul because of the way that it uses, or I could very much see, which I probably would agree with, where I don't think Akamura would be able to see the soul at all. So there's some questions to even be made where no matter how much damage, no matter how many attacks and how much of an advantage Akamura is over someone like Mahito, if he can't actually hit Mahito's soul and actually cause real damage to him, ultimately that's not going to matter at all. And the moment that Mahito gets 2, 3, 4, however many touches it takes with no curse energy reinforcement on Akamura's half to completely just rechange and mend Akamura's soul into something that takes the shape of like a small crystal or a giant baby, you know. And then there's also like, you know, sure, he's gonna have the speed advantage and probably the durability advantage and attack advantage, as we already discussed, but if he gets an arm cut off by Soul Split Katana, or like as we mentioned, he's getting jumped and somehow Yuji gets a soul dismantle or a soul punch on him, who's to say that that soul damage can even be healed by the life drain, the whatever life buff he gets from Magatsumi, right? It's definitely something that's not, you know, cut and dry and clear. It comes down to speculation, of course, but still, like as we said before, no matter how much of a power advantage you have, there are still things in both series that can kind of weigh you down and make you almost get brought down to the enemy that you're fighting's level, not even just on a domain situation.
I think that's like a very good point. There are definitely ways to deal damage to Akamura, but I would also kind of have to be fair and like flip my argument on its head a bit and go, well, you know, we say the domains have one-shot capability, or there are like soul attacks that could potentially damage Akamura with nothing he can really do about it. But at the same time, you know, within Akamura's kit, there's obviously a lot more than just his life drain ability, which is, for example, I don't really know what to call it other than, I mean, it's called Butterfly, but I don't know what to call it other than the Kagurabachi equivalent of a well-cutting slash.
Literally.
Which, like, if, you know, considering the fact that it basically is said to almost, it's so fast that it is basically the same as if it just spawned, like, in front of you. There's no way a character in Kagurabachi, unless they perfectly, like, aim dodge like Chihiro. So, because of Chihiro's a very unique eye, you could make an argument for Gojo by using that gay statement from a while ago. Could make an argument for, like, Gojo reading the move and aim dodging. Okay, cool, fine. But most characters, like 99.999%, are going to get hit with Butterfly. And obviously, if it bisects them, the only characters that I see surviving that are Mahito, Akari, and Jackpot, and potentially Takaba, but that's a whole different conversation. Everyone else, you know, if Gojo can't survive being cut in half, if Yuta can't survive being cut in half, well, okay, for most of the time he can't survive being cut in half, you know, what are you gonna do about it? There's nothing anyone can do. It's going to end the fight. It kind of works the same way as the domain thing, where it comes down to who's gonna land that hit. And even in that sense, like, there are very select characters in JJK that even have the capability of doing that. One of them is Mahito, who also is not going to be taken down by a butterfly. So I think so far, I would say Mahito is probably the biggest problem for Akemura Soga in the Jujutsu Kaisen universe.
No, I think you definitely hit the nail on the head completely, where it kind of comes down to almost like the conversation we had at the very beginning of this, right? Where the problem is not that Akamura is able to, like, you know, surpass characters like the Disaster Curses, you know, 15 Fingers, Sukuna, and all that stuff in Shibuya Incidents, you know, destructive capabilities, all that stuff, just based off of the feats that we've seen. It's the fact that he's able to do it effortlessly. Whereas even if you want to say, like, sure, like, Sukuna can do the world-cutting slash, the very first interpretation of the world-cutting slash, like, might have been the closest thing you can get. Like, because Sukuna had to lock himself out of that, right? Where then he had to, you know, he had to do the hand signs, he had to do the chant afterwards in order to catch Gojo off guard. So the exact attack that allowed him to kill Satoru Gojo, one of the strongest characters in the entire series, catch him off guard, which is something that is, you know, whether you want to say Gojo, you know, has gotten caught off guard by Toji. And, you know, there's other moments where this has happened before, but it's so rare that it's only happened, you know, once or twice. Like, Akamura can just do that casually. Butterfly isn't some attack he needs to, you know, wind up, he needs to charge, as far as we know, right? You know, he can just kind of throw it out there. And there's also things like Spider, which allows him to like paint that cobweb on the ground, and that just immediately immobilizes whoever is stuck inside of that. So even if he's dealing with a character that, let's say, for example, is tough for him to, you know, deal with, or like Naoya, where Naoya keeps moving, and, you know, the more that Naoya moves, the more that Naoya can use his ability, or like Yorozu might be able to try to form perfect sphere. Like, Spider can just happen and Yorozu's stuck in place. She can't, you know, summon the truth sphere anymore. She can't use her construction ability. Or like you have like Centipede that just like fires that omnidirectional slash. So like if people are trying to jump him, or someone like Maki or Yuji's trying to get like a sneak attack on him, he can just do, which is, I think it's almost 360 degrees, right? The Azami does prove there's like one area where like you can kind of get away from it. But like, yeah, like Akamura has plenty of things in his kit besides just, you know, he can just sit around and passive life drain, if that's at all any of the way that we presented him in this video. Like, again, this is supposedly a swordsman that was unparalleled in the Kagurabachi world. Like, no, like you said before, all of the enchanted blade wielders together were not even able to muster up to anything this man was able to bring, to the point that they were literally fighting him to stop him from enacting the malediction on Shokoku. And as you mentioned, he only stopped after the malediction was done. He said, all right, I guess I am done now. If you guys want me to stop, it's kind of too late. But like, this man is still extremely skilled. So on top of the fact that the way he's moving, 9 times out of 10, I could even see an argument where he's gonna slash through someone's hands before they can even call out domain, as we just so recently saw with like Modulo Yuji against Mahito, where like that is a viable option to just completely end all of that. But again, then there's things that get brought into question that may, you know, again, be an actual reasonable thing. Like, even if, you know, Akamura might be able to world cutting slash Gojo, like, who's to say things like Angel's Jacob's Ladder don't immediately counter whatever fucking black magic evil voodoo fucking Magatsumi is, right? And just like, he just immediately gets fried because he's just so... I think something that's interesting that you brought up too, that like is kind of late in the game now, but like you mentioned, like if Akamura was to get Magatsumi, you know, stolen away by deadly sentencing or confiscation, like I think there's also an argument to be made that like Akamura and the Magatsumi have become so intertwined and like basically can almost represent one and the same at this point. Like, that wouldn't even make a difference. Like, Akamura would still be able to use all his abilities, as we even see Yora can kind of do, without even unsheathing the Magatsumi, without even having a hold of it. He can still access a good amount of its abilities just from the connection.
Yeah, I think that kind of brings me on to the point that you actually made a little bit earlier that I think is really important to emphasize with Akamura, is that here in these conversations, we're talking about, you know, his use of the blade so far in the story, which is what? Butterfly, Spider, Centipede, all within that 250 meter radius, not really going all out. And as you said earlier, some of these abilities, like World Cutting Slash, just as a attack on its own, with the exception of, you know, a domain charged Fuga, was the pinnacle of what Ryoma and Sukuna could do. That was his ultimate, like, shrine slicing attack post Gojo fight, right? This is a casual ability for Akamura Soga. We have seen a tiny selection of the potential abilities that he could just literally, like, quite literally whip out of his ass at a moment's notice. Like, B came out of nowhere. We had no idea that thing even existed, but he can do so many things, and probably to like such a greater scale than we've seen, that's where the difference really comes in, right? Is that he is so in tune with this blade, and he has so much experience and just overwhelming power, that everything we're describing, which matches the pinnacle of JJK, is very casual for him, as opposed to, you know, Sukuna was doing all kinds of binding vows and needed like 4 arms to do the world cutting slash thing. Whatever, Akamura just goes butterfly. That's it. So yes, there is a cooldown period, sure, but like, it's what, in Kagurabachi, cooldowns normally between like 10 and 20 seconds, I think we learned from the Sojo fight, which is nothing. Yeah, but you know, compared to what he gains from that attack, having to wait 10-20 seconds to launch another one is barely a consequence for using that move, right? So I really do think it's kind of hard to argue that these abilities are going to get countered by anyone except from the most like niche abilities in Jujutsu Kaisen. So yeah, it's just really difficult to argue that even if there are lots of sorcerers in JJK with the ability to harm Akamura Soga, that they actually manage to finish the fight before he beats them to it. So yeah, and also just something I really like about this guy is that obviously whenever a strong shonen character pops up these days, the first question question everyone asks is, can they beat Satoru Gojo? Can they bypass Infinity? Previously, there wasn't really a way to do that in Kagurabachi, but then he whips out world cutting. So I'm going to sit here and confidently say, yes, I think he can. Just like, he just hard counters Infinity with that thing.
Literally, like, that's what was going to be the exact sentence that I responded with, was that, like, something that took Sukuna 12, 13 chapters. He had to steal, like, a teenage boy's body. He had to, you know, master the 10 Shadows technique, start whipping Maharaga out, and let Maharaga adapt to everything that Limitless was able to do. And then he was able to get the perfect blueprint for an ability that allowed him to catch Gojo off guard. Akamura can just do casually. And I think that is really the thing that separates him from almost everybody. Like, yes, Akamura can just butterfly and get through Limitless the moment that he realizes that Gojo can't be, you know, hit in normal ways. And the thing is Akamura is just going to just probably crack a joke about it or something like that. He goes, oh, I can't hit you. That, like, almost like Mahito did, like, oh, I can't hit you. This is kind of cool. All right, butterfly, boom, and then he's dead. Like, even characters like Sukuna or even like Meguna, that some people argue is the strongest version overall, like, put a character like Maharaga in there and you give him a chance to adapt to Magatsumi, that honestly might be one of your greatest chances you have against him, because most special grades, no matter how strong they are just going to be, you know, beaten down by Akamura, and everything that we've discussed, I think, makes a pretty clear case for it. I think you made the best argument possible, which is, like, only really niche cases. As I mentioned earlier, you have like Angel's Jacob's Ladder that might, you know, do something against Magatsumi as a whole. You have Takaba, which, like, even Takaba I call into question. I even put a little squiggly line next to him in my outline, because, like, this is also Akamura as a clown in and of itself. How am I supposed to believe that this man can't do what Kenjaku did to Takaba? You know what I mean? And just, like, play along with the gags. I don't know if I'm even just glazing too much, but, like, this character,
that might be glazed. That might be
okay, that's fine. Either way, like, I think overall my point still stands. I think that it's like the best, weirdest win conditions against Akamura are going to be like those really weird and just random cases like Takaba, or even that just stand a chance, because they're just so, like, what is Akamura really going to do besides, like I said, where you have my glaze interpretation of he's just a funny guy and he can match Takaba's clown. But, like, that's the best we have is Takaba. It's going to be a Kenjaku situation all over again. Like, this is the guy we're sending to fight this man.
I mean, I honestly, looking at every single kind of character that I would even consider in this conversation, the only characters at the moment, even though Mahito is like a weird one, Mahito doesn't have the stats necessarily for me to confidently say he'd win. He just might not lose. The only two characters that come to mind for me that I'm like, I think they probably do just beat Akamura as of right now, is straight up Takaba and Dabura. Those are the only two that come to mind that I actually see a clear path to victory. Takaba's problem is that he doesn't kill. So obviously he can't beat Akamura either, but he can, like, you know, massively nerf or
doll him like it's Pokemon.
Exactly, yeah, like, because Takaba's an interesting one where basically attacks land on him, and just as long as he's in that comedy zone, which he normally is, it just doesn't do, like, he would just walk out of Spider. You know, he would, these things, they just don't, the rules of power systems like Kagurabachi and JJK don't apply to Takaba. It's so strange. We can see from the Hazanoki fight as a good example, and Kenjaku as well. He eats attacks that by all means should kill him many times over, and just doesn't, like, he's not phased. He just walks it off. So that's one where it's like, okay, Butterfly is, you know, Akamura's gonna make the slashing motion, and Takaba's gonna stand there and be like, why are you doing that funny motion, bro? What's going on? And he'd be fine. That's how I feel like Takaba would probably be moving. And then the only other one I can think of is Dabura with his, like, silly, broken light speed stuff.
Yeah, no, Dabura, like, definitely holds a candle based off of, as you mentioned, the light speed attack. That definitely means, even without the awakening that Dabura got in his fight against Maharaga, I think it's pretty clear that Dabura was, like, pretty close to one of the highest speed of characters that you could get in JJK anyway. And if we're going with, you know, lightning ball, whatever you want to say, like, the Dabura definitely has a reasonable chance of fighting. I even think, like, there are certain cases as well, like you have Yuki Tsukumo, and while she, I don't think would win combat wise, I think if she was to create a black hole, you know, what is Akamura going to do against the black hole? But yeah, like, Akamura is a much more threatening villain than even the most strongest Heian-era Sukuna by far. I think just based off of everything that we've described, even if Akamura was caught in a malevolent shrine, we've already basically said that he could basically just do what Gojo did with his healing, and at the same time he's draining all of the energy from Sukuna while he's inside of his radius, and can still fight him inside of that radius where he's probably Ryuing faster than him, slashing faster than him. It has multiple different techniques that can be versatilely used into multiple different ways. He can spider Sukuna in his own domain and keep Sukuna from moving while Akamura just like, it's crazy. It genuinely is. Yeah, I think besides just like Maharaga adapting to Magatsumi, or like, I mean, maybe even Modulo Yuji, like, unless we're saying that he completely just matches Deborah in stats, that I know a lot of people are going to want us to say, even though it's definitely questionable, I think is just not gonna, it's tough. Akamura is definitely powerful.
The thing is, again, about Akamura is just that we're doing this based off what we've seen, and he's just got so even like you said with the Yuki thing, right? Okay, cool, Black Hole would work, I guess, but then he's got, you know, Centipede is a gravity-based ability. He has a gravity manipulating ability. Look at how strong Kenjaku is in JJK, and his gravity is like, it's so unbelievably like limited. It has some crazy restrictions, but it's still one of the most busted abilities. And Akamura just has a massively unrestricted version of that ability. It's like, where does it stop? You know, we can just go on, and there's probably stuff he hasn't even showed us, or maybe never even will show us, that he could do. So it's like, it's such a strange hypothetical, right? Where even to make it like relatively close, we have to just take what he's given us now. And even then, you know, it's like talking about Modulo Yuji. Okay, we've only seen him do this much, but we know he could do so much more, you know? Or like Prime Yuta, for example. It's basically all headcanon, but we know he would be moving different. It's the same kind of thing. It's very difficult to make an argument in JJK's favor when Akamura Soga is literally has an infinite bag, or supposedly infinite bag.
Yeah.
It's just such a like, I don't, even within Kagurabachi, forget Crossverse, all right? Within Kagurabachi, I don't understand how this guy exists as a shonen villain. Even Aizen, even Madara, they all have their limits. They have their set abilities. But Hokusoto just said, I'm gonna give this guy everything. He does whatever. He does it all. Just, it's, I don't even know at this point. He's just broken.
And the craziest thing is, at the end of the day, after everything that we've just talked about, combat-wise, stat-wise, all the JJK techniques, all the Kagurabachi techniques, the craziest thing at the end is this can all be over as quickly as it started, with just, you know, full-scale malediction, and who's gonna stop that? Again,
Hikari.
This is a guy that was just Hikari. I mean, this guy genocided a whole entire island in the span of what, you know, we don't know exactly how long, but it had to have been a day or so. And he was just, again, while he was fighting the 5 strongest enchanted blade wielders, who are basically the strongest people in the series besides him, casually, and yeah, everything that we've said, there's nothing more to be said at this point. It just, I think it's clear Akamura would absolutely devastate, you know, Jujutsu Kaisen. So I guess with that being said, I just want to thank you so much for popping on, Alonz. I really do appreciate it. And if you have any closing thoughts, or you want to tell the people what you're all about, this is your chance.
No, man, I love yapping about my 2 favorite shonen at the moment. And yeah, I'm so excited for the rest of this Seitei War arc from Kagurabachi. I feel like that's what I want to kind of just close off on, is I can't wait to see what we're going to get from that flashback arc that I know we've all been looking forward to. Hopefully some more enchanted blade magic from the OGs. I'm so excited for it. And yeah, I love this series.
Yep, but I'm sure it's just going to give us more glaze for Akamura to use in a future video, just from the past. But yeah, thank you again, and thank you to everyone who made it this far into the video. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure you hit the like button, subscribe to both me and Alonz, and we'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.